welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns podcast for August 11th, 2026. My name is Tom Luongo. We have a lot to talk about. It's episode 256, and I have the great pleasure of having back on the show Peter St. Onge, who hasn't been on for a while. So it's been probably not very many episodes back, but it's been a long time because I took about 2 months off from this podcast. And so I'm trying to do these on a weekly basis now in order just to have a nice regular schedule. So wanted to get Peter's take on a lot of things because Peter, unlike a lot of people, is not out there losing his mind on a regular basis. So Peter, good to see you. Hope things are well.
Yeah, things are great. Thanks for having me back, and glad to see you back to a regular schedule. You know, it's funny. It's like the whole question of retirement. Like, you know, on the one hand, when you're working, you feel like you don't have enough time. You can't get, and then once you actually retire, you know, you're wandering around the house, kind of rattling around, and you know, like you lose that routine.
Right.
You know, you have this kind of pump prime, like you've got to do the next episode, and so you know what you're doing every morning, and so no, I appreciate it. Like it's actually, you want to find something in the middle, right?
Hey, I'm not capable of keeping more than a once a week schedule on a podcast. So finally, after a while, I'm like, once a week, we'll do one. So and that'll be the way it goes. Then we'll just try and hit that mark every week, and then we'll go from there. So with that said, it's funny. You know, I let off with this saying, okay, everybody's out there losing their minds, and I don't know about you, but this is what I feel on a regular basis. And being one of the few people left who hasn't abandoned Donald Trump, I feel it more than a lot of people do. So it's interesting. We're deep into the election season now. We're getting close to the midterm elections, which are of course kind of, I don't know, singularity that everybody can't see past, right? And before you and I started recording, you mentioned you wanted to talk about what's happening with the Democrats, and I think we should start there, and especially in light of like Tucker Carlson going off the deep end into, I don't know, some weird place that he's gone. So I don't even understand how somebody could be platforming Hunter Biden at this point and anybody's supposed to take him seriously. But then again, there's the Democrats. So, you know, by comparison, maybe Tucker looks sane. So I don't know.
Yeah, the rise of the Democrat socialists, I think that's a really interesting moment here because in a way it parallels what happened to the Republican Party, where you know, when you and I were young, so I grew up in Philadelphia, and the stereotype of Republicans was that they were a bunch of country club millionaires, and then there were a bunch of toothless rednecks who wrestled crocodiles who gave them, like, you know, the votes. But fundamentally, the party was about benefiting the country club folks. And I think what Trump did is he really turned it into a populist party. And in a sense, that was inevitable, I think. You know, Trump is an agent of change, but he, I think, more perceived that the opportunity was there. And I think the opportunity was there because of social media, fundamentally. So, you know, my favorite moment to sort of analogize what's happening to us politically is the Gutenberg press back in the 1400s. And before Gutenberg, so Gutenberg just copied the Chinese concept of movable print. But what that did was it made books or it made printing like 1,000 times cheaper, right? Before then, if you wanted to have a peasant revolt and you wanted to publicize it, you could, in theory, go hire a bunch of monks to go write it out, hand lettered, okay? And then, you know, ship that. But with the Gutenberg press, you could print up 10,000 pamphlets. You could smuggle them out because at the time, all governments owned postal services because that was the main tool of censorship. So you would smuggle these things out. You'd say, you know, we're meeting at the Abbey's house to share our thoughts on his governance next Sunday, and boom, you have a peasant revolt. And so what that set off was 100 years, there was a lot of bloodshed. The old guard did not go willingly. But, you know, the reason why we have modern rights and constitutions, human rights, Second Amendment, the reason why we have all these things is because the peasants were able to organize. And when the peasants can organize, you know, every government has a tiny little standing army that constitutes, call it, I don't know, what, 0.2% of the population. Sure. And then you've got 99.8% of the population. Once you can organize, that's, you know, and that's part of the reason why we have democracy in the first place. Democracy essentially ratifies that. It says, look, if push comes to shove, you guys can kill us all. And so instead, let's just do this kind of mock battle, you know, almost like like Achilles, fighting against the hero. Let's just do this kind of mock battle. Let's say, okay, what if we did have a civil war? How would it turn out? 50.1% is over here. Okay, let's just do that and skip the civil war. So if we take that framework and now we apply the internet to that, right? Even in the pre-social media days, you had blogs, all of a sudden you had this alternative media that people could actually get something other than the mainstream. In the 1970s, Murray Rothbard said you could fit the entire Libertarian Party into a living room in New York. Okay, it's hard, especially for young people. It's hard to get your head around how difficult it was to organize. Yes, we had cheap printing, but it was very, very difficult to organize. In fact, to sign up for Murray Rothbard's letter, and if you're not familiar with him, he's the god of Austrian economics, of anarcho-capitalism. He is very based. In order to get his letter, you had to go into one of these crazy anarchist bookstores. If you remember when we were kids, you had to go into one of those. You would find the Freeman in there, and then the back of it, you would find, send a self-addressed stamped envelope. That was the state of distribution of alternative ideologies before the internet, right? So the internet gave us blogs. People could start getting different ideas. You had guys like Instapundit who took off, got real big, Drudge. But social media accelerated that like 100-fold.
Yep.
Right? It is absolutely stunning now what you can do where, like the New York Times, it has influence because it's got these sort of legacy networks of elites who all, go to the same dinner parties. But on traffic alone, on the volume of its megaphone, New York Times can't touch Joe Rogan. There's probably 50 guys in alt media who the New York Times can't touch. Forget CNN. CNN is an absolute joke. To the extent they have traffic, they buy it. I mean, this is the media model, is that you buy traffic. It's called advertising. Like, if you or I did that, right? Like if we ran around buying views, people would be like, you're fake. Okay, that is mainstream media, right? The entire thing is fake. They couldn't survive on their own. If I started like a podcast tomorrow and I called it, whatever, all the news that matters, and I copy the CNN model word for word, no way, right? It's garbage. The only reason that has any influence at all is because of people who grew up with it. They're 67. They don't realize they lie. They got nothing better to do with their time. They don't know how to use blogs or social media. So boiling that out now, we have something analogous to that Gutenberg era where the institutions they've completely melted, right? They had captured the commanding heights of ideological discourse, meaning the education system all the way through to universities and the media. Now, they haven't lost K to 16 yet because we haven't defunded them. We should. But the media at this point, if you look outside older people who have those habits, right? If you look at young people, like men, specifically men tend to seek out different information sources more. If you look at young men, I mean, who the heck is getting their marching orders from CNN? Nobody. So Trump, I think, I don't know that he recognizes those terms, but he saw that there was fertile ground for shifting the Republican Party towards populism, meaning forget about the donors, forget about the special interests. What do like regular people want? And in the process, he took the party from this country club elite to the regular people. Now, when I was younger, I was always jealous of the Democrats because the Democrats had the regular people. They were the working men. They were the union members and the nurse and the firemen. They were always going to be Democrats. The Republicans had this garbage brand, and it was sad to me that the champions of free markets and economic liberty anyway had such a crap brand. So what Trump did was he saw the opportunity. He said, you know what, screw it. To hell with the old guys. You remember when he was first running in 2016 and he gave a talk, I think it was one of the Democratic or one of the Republican debates, and he was insulting Republican donors and they didn't clap for him. And he said, oh, that's okay. I know you guys hate me. I don't want money from you anyway. Like he had a completely confrontational attitude towards the power base of the Republican Party because he basically, his attitude was, this is not a partnership, this is a takeover. And they perceive that. That's why they hate him so much. They still hate him. Guys at the Bulwark and Jonah Goldberg and all these critters. So that was the Republican moment. I think it's very, very healthy for the republic, for the party itself. It's been revitalized. Yes, you've got all these leftovers because Congress is job security for life. You got all these leftover rhinos, but they're getting knocked out one by one.
Hmm.
Now it looks like it's the Democrats' turn. So the Democrats are now going through that. And again, it was fated. Okay, this is not because Mamdani is a genius. It's because Mamdani, like Trump, sees that there is this open ground here for a populist movement within the Democrat Party, and his goal is to take over and completely reshape the Democrat Party, to turn it away from, the DSA voters think that the Democrat Party is a tool of the plutocracy, which is correct. Every Pride Month, every bank in America is covered in rainbows. Okay, they are not covered. Ash Wednesday, you can see a picture that makes it around the internet every so often. I think it's showing Ash Wednesday from like 1954. And every bank in Wall Street has a giant cross.
Hmm.
They turn out all the lights and they turn out enough lights, to make a
Right.
cross. Every single building in New York is a cross. That ain't today, okay? Now it's a rainbow flag. Every bank, every corporation. There are a couple of counter signaling corporations who are literally, making a play for MAGA, and so they avoid it. But broadly speaking, all of corporate America is a Democrat adjunct at this point. The DSA voters, well, young voters recognize that the DSA is taking advantage of it. So I think we're in a fascinating moment where both parties, their establishments are imploding. And I think it's going to be really messy between here and there. But I think at the end of this long process, we're going to have two populist parties. And, I think they're both going to be a lot saner than the parties that we had previous. And then I think the job for people like you or I is to try and sort of harm minimize both groups, try to turn them away from the absolute insanity
Right.
and back towards something productive.
Well, it's interesting. I agree with you in many ways. And I was just going to say, when you're going through everything with Trump, I want to remind everybody, you go back to 2016, and what did Trump do? What did we have on the Democratic side? We had Bernie Sanders, and the plutocracy
Yeah.
came in, stopped the Bernie bros, gave
Yep.
the nomination to Hillary Clinton. And the minute we saw that happen, I remember sitting there chatting with Dexter White about this. It was well before we had ever started Gold, Ghosts, and Guns. And I was, still writing my first stint with Newsmax. And I remember a conversation we had back in February of that year saying, you know what's going to happen, don't you? Trump's going to get the nomination. They're going to steal Bernie, and all he's going to do is pull a Reagan and pull the Bernie bros in, and will have a chance to win this election against Hillary. Which is exactly what happened, and for all intents
Yeah.
and purposes, minus the cheating, minus the thumb on the scale of the actual vote totaling and yada yada. Um, and so what we're seeing with the Democratic Socialists now, I think, is just it's the end of that playbook in the same way that Trump is kind of the end of the original Ron Paul revolution in 2008, right? Which woke up the remnant on the right, as Gary North would put it, on the right, the remnant woke those folks up. And then we watched it grow from Ron Paul in 2008 to 2012, where they had to, effectively steal the nomination from him and hand it to Mitt Romney, to eventually they couldn't stop Trump. We're seeing the same thing now in the Democratic Party, and they're kind of 8 years out of phase with the Republicans, except that they've gone full loony commie left, as
Yeah.
opposed to and supposedly populist, but really not. They're wearing the kind of the populist Edgar suit, right? If you do the Men in Black reference, right? They're just putting on the Edgar suit of being populist when really they're just commies who want to kill everybody. And but the rhetoric is exactly the same. And so what you're actually, I think we're watching, and especially the Michigan primary, I was funny. I don't know if I know, I'm sure I didn't have a conversation with you about this, or nearly everybody, but we were watching the Michigan primary results the other day, where Said versus whatever, Haley Stevens. And it was
Yeah.
interesting watching the vote drops in Wayne County, because Wayne County is much like Broward County used to be down in Florida or other places, and Philadelphia and whatnot. There's always they wait for the rest of the state to come in, and then they decide how many votes they have to print in order to try and overcome the deficit, right? In Broward County was always wait for the panhandle to close in Florida because it's in the central time zone, wait to see what those numbers are, then print the number of ballots in Broward, Miami-Dade, and West Palm, and
Yep.
then come up with a number. Miraculously, 77% used to be the vote totals that would stop at in Broward County. It stopped counting at about 77%. We no longer do that in Florida. Ron DeSantis has fixed that, but they still have that going on in Wayne County. What was
Mhm.
interesting is that there were massive numbers of drops coming for Stevens to try
Yeah.
and take the primary away from Saeed because the
Yeah.
Democratic establishment realized they have a problem. They're going
Yeah.
to lose that Senate seat most likely because Saeed is running farther to the left. He's making AOC look like a populist, like like a rational person, which is insane. So, um, it's very interesting to see that that the immune system of the DNC establishment has already kicked in, and we haven't even gotten to the midterms yet. Forget 2028. So, it becomes a very interesting moment, and I honestly think that Trump and company are like helping fund all this DSA
Yeah.
thing. I think there may even
Yeah.
be some Peter Thiel money, if I understand correctly. Um, I may be overstating my case here, but there's something weird going on here that just screams to me like somebody's counter operation is like, oh no, let's promote the communists so that we can, so that effectively the MAGA group can stay in power and then really take the fight to the GOP and kill them off over the course of the next two election cycles. At least that's the way I'm reading it right now.
Yeah, short term, that's definitely the correct Republican strategy. Democrats did that in 2016. They were trying to hype Trump,
Hmm.
right? You
Hmm.
had all this,
Exactly.
unearned media praising Trump, how, he tells it like it is. And, they
Right,
were all
right.
fluffing his balls because they wanted Trump because they were certain that he was going to be so easy to defeat.
I forgot about
But
that. You're right. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but this is, I think, because of the internet and specifically social media, we are now it's a different world. It's a
Hmm.
populist world. And indeed, the way that you win now is you get people excited. An excited voter is worth, between their propensity to vote and, to donate and volunteer and get their friends to vote and so on. That's like
Right.
a 10-to-1 voter if you can get somebody actually excited about you. So somebody like Jeb Bush with all the brand recognition, he was treated in 2016 as the inevitable candidate. He was the continuation of the whole John McCain, Mitt Romney,
Hmm.
W. And I mean, he didn't stand a chance. He did just nothing, bounced right off. So yeah, I think that's where we are, where, the Republicans should be cheering on the DSA.
Hmm.
If you're running an election, you always want a crazy person on the other side. I mean, you look at Hong, Saeed has, a lot of wacko positions. Hong in Wisconsin is insane.
Hmm.
She literally wants to abolish the prisons and police because they are tools of white supremacy. How many voters in
In Wisconsin. In Wisconsin.
like, yeah,
Swedish,
yeah,
white as white can be, Wisconsin.
right.
No.
This is not, it's not California, it's not Vermont, this is Wisconsin, this is a purple
It's not
state.
inner city Philly. Like it's not, it's not the
Yeah,
Bronx. Like
right. So
I
yeah, I
know.
mean, near term, the rise of the DSA is absolutely wonderful for the Republicans. I don't necessarily trust the Republicans. I don't want the Republicans to have cakewalks in life because that's how the crazy ones get in charge.
Hmm.
Like somebody like John Thune needs more competitive elections. Mitch McConnell, so but anyway, in the near term, absolutely the rise of the DSA is very good for the Republican Party. The question is what's just coming out in the long run. So, there was a time when the Democrat Party was JFK,
Hmm.
and you could argue that Donald Trump is very, very close to JFK.
Agreed. Agreed.
And in fact, if you compare Donald Trump and say AOC to JFK, I think without a doubt, Trump is closer. So in a sense, Trump has shifted the Republican Party to the old Democrat Party, which I think was a winning party. It was a party of common sense. You've got clips of Hillary talking about securing the border. There was a time when these people were saying, and if the Republican Party becomes that, and then the question is, what becomes of the current crazy Democrat Party? I would think for economic liberty anyway, that would be a best outcome. Would be essentially Democrats give up the old Democrat Party.
Hmm.
Yes, you still have 70-year-old steel workers who, aren't paying attention to how the party shifted or whatever, so they'll continue voting blue. But broadly speaking, the Republicans take the old Democrat Party And then the current Democrats become the party of, gay graduate students and, the 5% of Americans who believe that we should abolish the police. I mean, that would be a, pretty excellent outcome for the country.
I think so. And I mean, and it's really funny. Like they caught Mamdani. They found somebody finally released a video of him talking about how, he was going to basically position himself to be acceptable to, white middle class liberals, what
Yeah.
we like to now call awfuls, right? Affluent, white, urban, female liberals, right? And they used to call them Karens, but but out of deference to a couple of friends of mine, I don't use that term because that term is fundamentally racist.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
Right, because it comes out of black guys yelling about white women. That's where it
Oh,
really
yeah, yeah.
comes
Fair
from.
enough.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
no,
where
I
it
didn't
came
think
from
about that.
originally,
Yeah.
right? So I
Yeah.
like awfuls better for a variety of reasons, not because it's hilarious and I love a good
It's
acronym.
awesome. Yeah.
Former chemist, I like acronyms. What am I going to do? But well, what's interesting about all of these dynamics, is that it's also setting up, if Trump can again get through the midterms and everything else. We're starting to watch the turn. Like, but the funny part I find, right, throughout all of this, I mean, there are many things that, you can criticize Donald Trump about, and I'm happy to do so. But on balance, if I just kind of said, if I had a president that was beginning the process of unwinding Social Security, getting the younger generations out of Social Security, for one, you know, and the starting the process of trying to, like, let's close the border. Let's, bring manufacturing back. Let's try and shore up the dollar. Let's put the Federal Reserve on a ticking clock, for lack of a better. Let's put them on a shorter leash. If all of these things were happening under normal circumstances, we'd be like, oh my God, that's like the greatest president of all time. And yet, sadly, my former libertarian brethren are all losing their minds, and I don't understand. Well, I do understand, but it's for a variety of different reasons. Part of the reason why I like to have you on the podcast, Peter, is because I've noticed that you're pragmatic about these things. And I'm in a pragmatic mode, because we have to save the country before we can decide what we're going to do with our principles. Like, I can't eat those right now. Sorry, folks. So my point is you tweeted out something this morning, which I found really fascinating, which was that it's the acceleration of earnings in the S&P 500, right? Um, and it's something that we made. This may be very nascent. It's very short term. It doesn't really matter, but what it may matter. What I'm getting at here is that we're beginning to see some of the effects of the deregulation of low. I mean, we have mixed employment data that none of us can even explain. We have jobs going down and the unemployment rate going down. And it's not just because labor force participation rate is falling. It's because we're getting rid of people and we're sending them home.
Yeah.
And so, like, everything's in flux, the data's a mess, and everybody, as opposed to looking and just looking at the data kind of rationally, everybody wants to grind their particular political axe. And I find that to be unproductive at a minimum, and certainly unconstructive at worst. So I want you to talk about that a little bit and tell me if you're seeing what you're seeing, and how it all fits together. I would appreciate that.
Yeah, it's tricky.
And it's tricky.
As
Don't get me wrong. I know it's not easy. Just
Oh, yeah. So any content producer, like anybody who talks about the news, is going to know that bad news sells. If it bleeds, it leads. Talking about doom gets a lot more views. It's much more popular. There is an entire industry on right, left, libertarian, and all of it talking about how the whole system is going to collapse tomorrow.
Mhm.
And I have no faith in the system, right? I think, governments are criminal organizations. The only reason to have one is because otherwise the other criminal organization will come in and invade you. It's the only purpose I can possibly see for a government. Okay, so I'm not a
Agreed.
fan of them. I don't like them. However,
Mhm.
you have to live in the real world. And the question is always, where are you now? And how do you get to somewhere better? So if you are on a mountain and you see off in the distance that there's a much higher mountain that you would like to be on, you cannot jump to it, right? There's an endless market for people talking about jumping to it, but you can't realistically jump to it. When you're 23, you can talk about jumping to it. Once you have kids, once you have something to lose, you got to live in the real world. And in the real world, you got to go down the mountain, you got to go up the higher mountain. This is the reality. And so, when I look at somebody like Trump, people are upset about the war. They're upset about not getting rid of the surveillance state. There were a lot of things that I think, Trump promises all kinds of stuff, right? Like if you literally list his, house prices are going to drop in half and wages are going to quadruple. And okay, so Trump speaks in hyperbole. Okay, fine. Let's set that aside. Still there are a lot of unforced errors. The war, I think, is the most glaring. That he spoke of peace and not rebuilding countries, and now we're fomenting a revolution in Iran, which turns out to be based on bad intelligence, of course, because that's the only intelligence that we pay for at the CIA. But at any rate, if you take those disappointments, nonetheless, put those over here and ask, okay, what are the other options? Right? Ideologically, I love Ron Paul. Aside from age, would Ron Paul have fought like this man? This man is a psychopath. He is a force of nature. He's brutal. Democrats, they envy his ability, to connect with people, to frame the arguments, to take the spotlight off, say, oil prices and put it on, say, transgenders and sport. I mean, he's very, very good at what he does. And, the larger issue is that if you zoom out from it, so he was the first president in history. He was talking during the campaign, yes, but he was talking about replacing the income tax with tariffs. That is epic. That is so far beyond, okay, right? So take, on a scale of 1 to 100, Romney is whatever, a 2, in terms of economic liberty anyway. Right. W is like a 4. Reagan is like a 12. Trump, he is off the charts in terms of what he would like to change. He would, if he had the power to, I think he would just demolish the federal government. I think he would sit down with the 10th Amendment guys and go through, oh, this isn't constitutional? Great, let's get rid of it. I'm going to call up, Russ Voigt and Russ Vogt and get rid of this thing. He's an absolute force of nature. So a lot of the stuff that I think people are disappointed about him is that he's constrained by Washington. There's only so much he can get through. He alone cannot abolish the income tax, sadly. Maybe we should have a king so he could, but at any rate, he can't. And then, there are, yes, some things that, I was not happy with the war. I remain not happy with the war. I wish we would not do that anymore. But, you always have to ask, compared to what? And I don't begrudge the sort of purists, okay, because I think it's very important to have them in this world, right? I think it's very important to have people who say, look, Trump has this flaw and this, and, we're still light years from nirvana. Okay, I think that's very important. However, when they criticize me, which is all the time, they call me a sellout, whatever. And I am operating in the real world. Okay, you will know when I've completely given up, because at that point I will bitch about medieval Iceland with the distributed justice and all these anarcho-capitalist topics. Yes, when I start doing that, you will know that I've given up. I've not given up. I think we are not that far from turning the tide. And when you see something like the Democrat Socialists, that's pretty encouraging, right? The uniparty, I think, is collapsing in real time. One wing of it has already halfway collapsed. Now I think the other wing is collapsing. And, I think an instructive moment was during the 2008 bailouts. And you had the Tea Party formed directly out of that. There was this rant by Rick, I think it was Rick Santelli.
Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah, he was on air and he was like, what the hell, all these rich guys get bailed out when they screwed up, and to hell with them. So that launched this movement. And then a couple months later, you had Occupy Wall Street, which was also pissed off about the bailouts. And those two sides were this close to merging into a new populist movement that crossed parties. Yep. And of course, the corporate media jumped in. Man, they saw that coming and they jumped right in. Yes, and they were like, racists and, hate gays. And, they deployed everything they could to try to drive a wedge between those two. But I think if you look at, going back to the Gutenberg 2.0, to the shift in social media, I think we're constantly flirting with each other. That's part of the reason why I want to stay involved with the populist movement. I think it could go very, very bad. Historically, it has many times. It could go very, very good, I think, if there are people in there who are paying attention and trying to get them to join together in a way that drops the most harmful parts and keeps the best parts.
You see, I agree, and what's important, what I've noticed, and this is where my inquisition has taken me, is where my understanding. Okay, so how do we get there, right? Or how do we do what you just described? Well, you have to have the people in power who understand who the real enemy are. And that's the problem. It's not Iran, it's not the Russians, it's not the Chinese. It's the people who actually we have the longest term relationship from the beginning, from the founding of the country, which is the freaking British and the French and the old European colonialists, who we have
Yeah.
deep, deep ties with, who affect our banking system, or affect our cross-border trade flows, or affect the value of the dollar, who have had more influence over our economic policy than anybody else. I'm sorry, I don't. Last I checked, I don't see us using Chinese style monetary systems, right? I don't think Keynes was a Chinese. Keynes, by the way, wasn't Chinese. Let's just make it like abundantly clear, right? So when you stop to go through this, I'm like, 1913. Every libertarian in the world knows that 1913 was the second or third American Revolution, depending on how you keep score. And yet, by the time we were done with all that, we wound up with Britain's foreign policy, Britain's monetary policy, and Britain's tax code, a worse
Yeah.
tax code than we had before. And
Well,
so,
Hamilton was the beginning of the end. Yeah.
well, one could argue that. And I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I agree with that anymore. And this is part of the reason why I won't call myself, I have to call myself a post-libertarian something, whatever the hell I am at this point. And it's because in the context of that old Anglo-Dutch debt slavery central banking system, what do you combat it with is the big question, not as a final thing, but as a transitional thing. And this is part of the reason why you know, I find the period that we're in right now so very interesting. And it's why I brought up earlier, I don't, I'm not ideologically bound to any of this stuff anymore, because I see this as, I know that the one thing that we've been living under, this post-Bretton Woods central bank dominated era of what I like to call Friedman's nightmare of competitively devalued currencies and all the rest of it. I'm done with this. I don't know I don't know what you replace it with. Do you go with Hamilton and McKinley like Trump is doing? Do you come up with something else? I don't know. This is what's in front of us. This is what we've got. And it was the argument that was made during the last time we were in a perilous state where we had too much debt, not enough income, effectively we had just won the revolution, and we had a mess. So I'm like, I'm willing to give that a try, because at this point, I don't care, right? I need the idea of we the people, or, write and ordain this constitution as an ideological thing to survive, because the old kings of Europe want it dead. And they want that dead more than anything else. This is not about economics. This is about philosophy. This is about ideology. This is about who is in charge and who isn't in charge, that validate these basic ideas. That's the way I'm seeing this fight. So when I see some of the things that Trump has done so far and are beginning to work, which is why I invoked the S&P thing earlier, it's in order to serve the idea of, maybe we've already gone through the worst of the printing and the this and the that and everything else, and now all we have to do is get productivity and the collateral that undergirds the productive base of the society risen in value to the point where we can just accept what has happened, accept the past, move on, and go forward. Because that's where Trump's head is. Trump's head is in the
Yeah.
future. It's not in the past. Okay.
Right.
So I, I
Yeah.
don't know what you think about it. I don't know if you've heard me do this rant before. So I wanted to lay that out for you, where my head really is. So
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question. Saifuddin Amous has
mhm,
this phrase that I love, which is fiat elite,
mhm,
right? So an
mhm,
elite that they're not the natural elite. They're not there because they're capable or productive or good for society. They're there because they snuck in. They're, essentially a parasitic elite. And I think that, if you sort of boil down what Trump's trying to do, he's for the little guy, but he also likes to hang out with billionaires. He likes billionaires. He hires them. He plays golf with them. He doesn't have a problem with billionaires. And I think that's the distinction is fiat elite versus natural elite. And if we look back to the most recent successful models, I mean, the US pre 1913 was incredible. It was, in every way, it was the most impressive policy the world has ever seen.
Yep.
And culturally, innovation, wealth creation, I mean, there is no metric. It's just astounding. Britain in the 19th century was also very close. And the reason for both, I think, is the same, which is that, we effectively, our Constitution was built as sort of like a dead hand of a king. Okay. In other words, before 1913, before they drove a truck through it, before the Constitution in exile, when FDR, imposed a dictatorship and the Supreme Court pretended not to notice, before all that, if you go back to the original construction of the Constitution with the 10th Amendment, right, which essentially says any power we haven't given the federal government, you're not allowed to do. And there's only like 10 powers in there, like post offices and a navy. Okay, there's almost nothing in there. If you go back to that, that's almost like having a negative king. It's almost like having a king who says, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. In Britain, and so the end result is that you have a government that can't screw much up. Mm-hmm. Right. And so you had all this wealth creation. Nobody was paying income taxes. You didn't need a license to do this. Look at everything Edison did. How many licenses would you need for all that? Right. He just showed up. He bought a house. He started building crap. And some of it blew up. Some of it didn't. I mean,
right. No, seriously.
Yeah. Now, Britain didn't have a constitution, but what Britain had was complete dominance by a ruling class. If you've got dominance by a ruling class of fiat elite, I think that's the end of the world. That's the Soviet Union, right? The Soviet Union was run by an elite, for sure. It was not Joe Bologna, between sips of vodka, okay, running policy. There was an elite, but it was a fiat elite. It was not an elite that earned their way there through some merit. In the British system in the 19th century, and functionally the American system, because rich people buy policy. But in those two systems, we had an elite, but that elite had earned their way. Generally, they were business people. I think the U.S., we had a better elite because they were generally more self-made. In Britain, a lot of them were inheriting. But if we ask, like, what would the ideal system be from here? It's always a mirage, the idea that you're going to hand power to the people. People do not want power. They cannot exercise it. They don't know what's right for them. The voters of Detroit would be far better off if they couldn't vote. There is no question. They would have lower murder rates. They would have schools that function. If they would stop voting and let other people who understand these things vote, it would be better for them. The people controlling power is extraordinarily dangerous. What I think you want is a elite that the people have chosen, that was not installed, that was not imposed on them by other powerful people, essentially buying policy or bribing their way into it. I think that's fundamentally what we're talking about here. So Trump, in his mind, I think he really likes the natural elite. He has utter contempt for the fiat elite. He likes the people, but he's not necessarily trying to introduce, nationwide referendums or, he's not pushing the idea of people power directly. I think where his heart is he believes in the natural elite. And I think if you look back through history, that is the way to run a country. There's no other way that works. You need the natural elite. They have to somehow have earned their way there through productivity, through service in terms of building things, not in terms of playing this sort of tournament of Hunger Games of political power,
and just grifting rentier style,
for sure,
off
exactly.
of a financial system that rewards financialization over that of productivity. And I think that's the inflection point that we're all at, is that whether you agree with Hamilton's ideas of the political economy or not, it versus what we currently have is far better, because at least it says produce something, build a thing that puts people to work, that captures some amount of creativity, as opposed to, oh, you get to build this, but only after we get to take all the profit in the form of the interest payments on the note and the money that we printed to give you the thing, as opposed to creating credit and then extinguishing that credit after you've built something, and then you now have something permanent and the credit's been destroyed, right? Which is effectively what Hamilton's arguing for. Again, not a perfect system, but a transitional one to kickstart an economy that has literally been hyper financialized, which is where we are now. And
Yeah, and
I think and what I'm
yep.
getting at here, going here is that this is what the end. This is why they're so angry that someone, Scott Besson, is attempting to destroy the yen carry trade, because the yen carry trade was the fuel for the post Bretton Woods era to hyper financialize the global economy.
Okay, and how so?
Oh, well, it's not hard. Like, think of it this way. You build up an industrial Japan. Richard Werner's done this work, and I like what Richard has to say about this stuff. But if you think of it this way, if you keep a currency of a major industrial power weak and its interest rates low, you can now fund the constant levering up of the financial system through the interest rate arbitrage between that and other economies. So now
Right.
you're borrowing yen at 0.5% in order to, you know, buy treasuries at 4%, you're pocketing 3.5%, and then you can lever that up through the offshore dollar system and the infinite leverage that you're allowed to get hold of in London and all of its offshore proxies, which is fundamentally different than what you can do on Wall Street, by the way. Um, there's a reason for that. And so that, and then it gets even more complicated when you start like putting in tri-party carries and blah, blah, blah. But effectively, the the sovereign bond markets are all rigged via the yen carry trade. And why, the more I read, the more I think through what's happening right now, the the more I realize it's very obvious it's the interest rate arbitrages here that are the key. And why does nobody
Yeah.
in the financial world to speak of, and again I'm going to the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, the Economist, all those rags are all screaming that Japan can't raise interest rates from here, because if they do, someone's going to lose their ass. And that person is not the United States. Why is Scott Besson coming in to defend Japan while Japan is trying to do the right thing, which is to normalize interest rates relative to its inflation rate, which is what's happening. And why isn't the Bank of England happy about this idea? Why isn't the ECB happy about this idea? Well, maybe it's because they've been rigging the euro yen cross and the euro pound cross, the yen pound cross forever in order
Yeah.
to rig our interest rates here in the United States. The more I dig into that side of the world, right, over the last 4 or 5 years, since I started like going down the rabbit hole of why did SOFR replace LIBOR and all of this stuff that I've been talking about forever and a day that no one understands, and I get it, I understand. The more I realize, oh, that's what they've been doing. And I'm like, holy sheep shit. It's all staring us in the face, and then they're just using that to buy all the favors, all the social media, all the bots on social media and everything else in order to perpetuate and degrade the value of Gutenberg 2.0 to the
So
point
it's
where
kind of
we can't
the
even like figure out who's telling the truth anymore and who's not.
so it's the US aid of interest rate differentials, where it's this gift that keeps giving and that can fund the entire rest
I
of.
Well, yeah, and what I
Yeah.
think, honestly, is what's happening is that Besant and that Warsh wants to lower interest rates. Ueda needs to raise interest rates. And I think that convergence between the potential, think about the world that would exist if the United States and Japan were within 25 or 50 basis points of each other, as
Yeah.
opposed to
Oh yeah.
4%.
Yeah.
What would that do to Europe? What would that do to the Bank of England? What would that do? It would destroy them
You've seen it
completely.
every time. Yeah, I think in the past couple of years we've had two or three scares on
Mhm.
the yen carry trade, and God, one of them, U.S. stocks just absolutely plunged. I think we lost like 2-3% in a day, and it was
It was
epic.
it
Considering that,
was it
like,
was a Black Monday. It was the day after the Bank of Japan raised off of the zero bound. They went from
that's it.
0.1% to
Yeah,
0.25. The first time they did their first quarter point raise. Yeah.
yeah. And Japan is a trivial export destination for U.S. companies. I mean, there's
Right.
no other explanation, but it was a massive liquidity hit, or I
Mhm.
mean, it wasn't anything. It was foreshadowing a potential liquidity hit. So, I mean, it's a fascinating question, like just how much of global liquidity is based on the U.S. Japan interest rate differential. Therefore, how much of AI valuations, home prices. I mean, every asset is priced off that flood of liquidity. And so if that goes away, which I think ultimately it has to. I mean, Japan's backed into a corner, but it's it's got to take one bullet and it's got to choose which one.
It,
The way it's going, every crisis is harder to manage. At this point, it can't even do it on its own. It needs the U.S. Can't necessarily count on, Gavin Newsom or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Treasury Secretary to play ball next time. Like the crises are getting harder and harder to manage. And at some point, I think Japan does have to bite the bullet. It's got to hike interest rates. That is going to blow a hole in Japanese banks and pensions.
Mhm.
The banks, you can bail out the pensions. I mean, the numbers get big. Japan already has a ton of debt. They can't necessarily just issue it willy-nilly. There is a point, people have this stereotype of Japanese as just sitting back and taking it. Nah, what are you going to do? Shikata. But if you look back, it wasn't that long ago. I think up until the 80s, but certainly in the 1970s, they had riots every year by the unions pushing for wage demands. And I mean, stuff would burn. Like these were big
Mhm.
deals. They would, pitch battles. Korea still does that, by the way.
Mhm.
But anyway, if Japanese pensions start going down, it'll get ugly even in Japan.
Well, this is like what I think. This is why I do believe that the part of the reason why they need to raise is in order to because they got to repatriate a lot of capital. It's really what it comes down to, and this is where an alliance with the United States actually works to their advantage because what Bessent is doing here by backstopping Japan here is saying to everyone, look, we are not going to allow it to get out of control. We do need you to bring your capital home. The Japanese corporates are some of the biggest foreign investors in the world, but it's now time to start repatriating some of that capital, bring it home so that we can control the long end of the yield curve, yada yada yada. But what I've been noticing, and this is the weird part, I'm leaving out part of the story that I've begun to uncover here, which is that it really does feel like, and I've been again in the world in my admittedly conspiratorially bented mind, right? I have a conspiratorial bent because I just see that people are just not neutral actors. I just don't believe anybody's a neutral actor when it comes to governments predating on each other. Like, I'm sorry. I'm like, I just, oh no, we're all peace. We're all sweetness and light and we all and we all love the world. No, Peter, please. Like, what am I, 12? Obviously, they all hate each other and they're all trying to steal money from each other at a certain level. And then you have to ask the big question is who's been running a potentially short yen, short carry trade, short treasury bond carry trade while we come into the midterm elections. And would that be good or bad for Donald Trump? Well, it would be terrible for Donald Trump, obviously. Any time you can extend and pretend something that they perceive as bad for Trump, if they hate him as much as you pointed out at the beginning of the podcast, then they're going to do anything and everything imaginable, including potentially giving him a financial crisis that he can't deal with. And I think that
Mhm.
what I began to watch about 3 weeks ago, during the middle of July, right, um, which is always the beginning of the political season, right? The election season really doesn't start until mid-July. That's usually when the Democrats and Axios start telling you how they're going to cheat in the elections, right? They're going to tell you, they start telling you what's going to happen. Oh, there's going to be a financial crisis in private equity come October. I wonder why. And then it always usually seems to happen. And it's because, look, they know what the trades are. They know what they've done. I've watched too many times now an event that comes about where no one could figure out why this happened. And I'm like, well, Bill, you gave a known criminal $8 billion, and you lent that same $8 billion to him 9 times to go buy stock, and then you wonder why when his trades blow up, you wonder why the whole thing tries to take down the entire global financial system. I'm not talking about Bill Wang, Archegos Capital. Like we keep seeing this thing over and over and over and
Yeah.
over and over again,
Yeah.
right? It's like BOFA hasn't cleared their friggin' short gold book at $5,500 an ounce. Excuse me, you knew gold was rising. You didn't clear your short book. Why didn't you close your short book? Maybe because you were under orders not to close your short book. We all want to believe that the world is that everybody's incompetent when really sometimes they're just vandals. And when you start taking the vandal mindset, you start realizing that, oh, no. The people who don't want the United States to get off of its back and build Trump's whatever version of Trump's golden age we're going to wind up in, they're going to do everything imaginable to stop that from happening. You have to assume that is the case. You have to assume that if you're going to poke that dragon, that he's going to breathe on you. And that dragon, of course, is the entrenched old powers, financial powers of the world, the rentier class, the fiat oligarchs, whatever, however you, but the fiat elite that you talked about earlier. They're going to protect every ounce of that, every erg of that they absolutely can. And sometimes reminding yourself, just put your head in their, put your head in their space for a little while and think how they would react to the things that are happening, because they can read the polls, they can see what's happening. And so it becomes a, if I can see it, they can see it. Or even if I'm like crazy, it doesn't matter whether I'm crazy or I'm not crazy. Somebody has gamed that out some way, manner, shape, or form, because it makes no sense otherwise. It's like saying, oh yeah, we're going to go to war, and we didn't know that that Iran was going to close the Strait of Hormuz. Really? Like, they've only been yelling at us that they were going to do this for 47 years. We knew they were going to do it. We did it anyway. Now ask yourself the reason why. You don't have to like it. Don't have to agree with it. You should at least be able to have a rational discussion as to why. Right. So,
Yeah.
So when I get into this, like this is where I get weird. I know I get weird on people when I do this stuff. And I know I'm throwing a lot at you, because that's why I wanted to bring it back to very simple things. Like, I wanted to go to the end character because I wanted to bring that up to you personally, because I wanted you to have some ideas about it, but I don't necessarily care if you agree with me or disagree with me about it. What's important is for you to consider it, and then I'll start talking about what we're actually seeing. And again, I want to go back to this point. I think it's very important in this time of maximal pressure to make it such that Trump is going to lose the midterms. But we're getting economic data that's actually really interesting, that says otherwise. And I think that that's what needs to be discussed, because no one's really discussing it, without getting all ideological about it. And I don't want to get ideological about it. If you think the data is not nearly that interesting, tell me. I want to hear it. If you think it's cool, I want to hear that too. Like, that's what I care about, because I know you follow them so much more closely than I do. So.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the big question at the moment is how is the economy doing? And, for the past couple of months, we had really muddy numbers on inflation. So if you look immediately before the Iran war started, Trueflation is a company that creates an alternative measure of inflation. They scrape actual numbers. For example, they go to Zillow and they actually scrape and they say, okay, what are homes selling for? And they do this, across 1.3 million. And they had annualized inflation before the war started. I think at one point it was 0.7%.
Yep.
And now that is far past the point where traditionally the Fed would start counterfeiting on purpose to try to generate more inflation to flood onto Wall Street, right?
Yep.
So that was kind of the state before the war started. Now, once the war started, of course, energy took off. That took the entire inflation rate up. I think for a couple months there, we had double-digit inflation on an annualized basis. Last month, we had deflation, annualized -5%. But again, all of that is energy. The jump is energy, the fall is energy. And so the question for the Fed is, when you strip that out, what's actually happening in the economy? And, are we still in that world before the war started where underlying inflation is 0.7%? Has something fundamentally changed because of the war? I think energy prices are going to stay high for a while. It doesn't seem to me that there's a clear exit out of the Hormuz takeover. Trump is, I think, trying to declare victory. He's tried to do it about 36 times at this point. And Iran's not interested in that because from their perspective, survival is victory. So I think he's jumped into a cage fight with somebody who wants to get beaten up. So it's an issue because from the Iranian regime's perspective, what do they care about bridges? Right? It's not their bridge. Like Trump keeps doing things where he says like, okay, if you guys, send drones at whatever, Bahrain's oil facilities, we're going to bomb a bridge for every drone you send. And guess what? They sent a drone because they don't care. Right? From the Iranian regime's perspective. So like Trump loves the country. He loves big, beautiful bridges in America. And so in his mind, they're thinking the same way, so, if I really want to hit these guys where it counts, I'm going to take out a bridge. It's not working. So at any rate, it looks like he can't get out of it. One way or the other, I think that Iran's going to have some sort of control over Hormuz, which means that energy prices stay high. Now, that's also interesting, going back to your earlier point, that when something looks stupid, it's probably enemy action. We've had a tremendous increase in American oil output because of this war. You could argue that we might prefer a world where the Hormuz is closed because we get to pick it up, right? Oil prices stay high, but high oil prices are neutral to positive for America because we have so much oil production. Even the Red Sea, like American ships don't transit the Red Sea. The Red Sea is to get from Asia to Europe and back. That's not our problem,
Right.
right? So you could argue that if Iran is a stalemate at this point, where the Red Sea is going to be somewhat closed, or at least it's going to have massive costs to it, to the point like insurance costs, so ships go around. If the Hormuz is effectively closed because Iran keeps taking pot shots, that's kind of good for America from a mercantilist perspective, because it means we can still trade with everybody. We have a big, beautiful Pacific Ocean and a big, beautiful
Panama
Atlantic,
Canal and Gulf of America, and I've been making
a
that
Panama
argument.
Canal,
I've
who's
been
now
making this
more
argument since the beginning
respectful
of the war,
towards
to be
us.
honest with you. Yeah, no, I've been making I've been making the argument that the guy who wants the Strait of Hormuz closed more than anybody else is Donald Trump, because it again, who is the loser at the end of that collateral chain? You mentioned it. It's Europe. Europe has to pay higher energy prices, or they have to,
Right.
even worse, they have to buy our diesel fuel.
They have to buy our energy. Asia has to buy us. They're more dependent on us.
Mm-hmm.
Trump has, he's not been shy about his displeasure with, Europe for not lifting a finger in Iran. He said, he's literally said, the Hormuz doesn't matter to us. It matters to you guys. So maybe you guys should do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as a isolationist, as somebody who doesn't think that we should go police the world, I've loved it. If this could take down NATO, then the war would absolutely be worth it. But taking it back to the Federal Reserve, what that means is that we're very muddy on inflation right now. Mm-hmm. It's not clear if we're still in that world of 0.7%. Has something fundamentally changed because the Hormuz is not the Hormuz anymore? So we're going to have this permanent spike to oil that could, in theory, get worse as countries run down their reserves. But the other half of the equation for the Federal Reserve, when it decides how it's going to manipulate the economy, is jobs. And jobs, we just had a report last week, I think you were referencing at the top, which is pretty interesting. So we lost jobs last month, 23,000 jobs, small amount, but anyway, we lost jobs. And the unemployment rate went down. And that's weird, right? It's supposed to be the opposite. When you lose jobs, unemployment is supposed to go up. So, of course, what's going on is that we've lost about 2.5 million people from the labor force. And so the question is, how much of that is immigrants? How much of that is federal workers retiring early with their extraordinarily generous pensions and sitting on their butt, fishing and going to No Kings rallies? But is there also something real in there? And there's a couple possibilities, right? One of them is negative, which is that maybe, first off, it's concentrated. The labor force participation is concentrated among 55 to 65. And those people are interesting for two reasons. Number one, if they get fired, they have a hard time finding a job. Number two, if anybody's hurt by, say, the COVID jabs, it's statistically going to be those people. And then number three is sort of the contrary, a good story, which is that the average household wealth at age 65 in the U.S. is about 1.5 million. It's average. So a lot of those people may, it'd be a combination, but they could basically be saying, look, I got enough money. Since 2019, everything has gone up thanks to the Fed. Everybody's bags are pumped. It doesn't matter what you were in, right? Gold went up, Bitcoin went up, stocks went up, houses went up, everything went up. Baseball cards went up. And so that's kind of the big question right now is we can see the labor force dropping. We know a bunch of it is immigrants, but even beyond that, there's this weird effect happening in 55 to 65. So is that a bad thing that they're losing jobs and can't find a new one? The Zero Hedge likes to call it the no hire, no fire economy. Or is it a good thing that the Fed has pumped so many bags that people are literally dropping out? But you put those two together, and between the inflation having muddy signals, now jobs have muddy signals. The Fed normally is driving, my favorite analogy for them, they're a race car driving at night with no headlights And, because they're reacting to what's happening right now, but everything the Fed does tends to have a 12 to 18 month lag.
Right.
So they're like steering based on where the car will be in 200 feet. I mean, that's dangerous, right? If you find yourself doing that, you should stop driving.
Yes.
There is no way to do that safely. And right now, if you look at, between inflation and jobs, which are normally those are the two metrics that the Fed uses to fine tune the economy, both of those, I would argue they're completely unreadable at the moment. You don't know what's happening in both of them because there's this massive energy noise and energy, and then there's this weird labor force thing going on, which there's no concrete data on it. You can try to dig into, part-time workers, people with a second job,
Right.
quit rates. You can try to go to all these secondary ones, and they're contradictory. Like, we don't have clear signals on either of those, so it's hard to say if the economy is strong right now or weak. We can say what would help it, right? We can say ending the Iran war, bringing energy down, continuing to get rid of regulations and, whatever.
Right.
Okay, we can say that those things would help. But in terms of, from the Fed's perspective, is it going to make a policy mistake? It has no signals right now.
Yeah, no, so this is why I think actually we're actually also in a transition period with the Federal Reserve. This is something that I've been talking about for a long time since we started thinking about the potential for SOFR as what it is, which is from the beginning, I thought it was a replacement for the Fed funds rate.
Yeah.
And was talking to my friend Matt Dines about this. And he's like, look, the Fed funds is a dead market. Like, it's mostly just the Federal Home Loan Banks. He can speak far more intelligently about this than I do. I'm just paraphrasing what I've heard him say to me. He's like, but that's what he does for a living, is he trades in bonds and everything else. He's like, look, the Fed funds is basically a dead market. SOFR has effectively killed it. It's fine. So now it's a market driven rate. So in effect, then what is the Fed funds rate other than a guide for offshore money to get access to the dollar? And what's the T-bill market look like? So what's the rate that we're going to be paying for if we can ever get clarity passed to get the stablecoin market moved? So we're at a very interesting transition period between the Eurodollar system and what is nominally the stablecoin system, which is an era of Fed dominance to an era of Treasury dominance in very broad terms. So again, to your point about, oh, look, inflation is mixed, jobs are mixed. And Kevin Warsh has literally said the Phillips curve. I am not going to govern the Fed by making the cruel choice between inflation and jobs and employment, which is effectively saying I am saying no mas to the Phillips curve anymore, which ends one of the big Keynesian shibboleths.
Yeah, I think the Phillips curve was always propaganda to cover the fact that the Fed will always respond to inflation and jobs, not because there's a scientific connection between them, but because that's what gets the pitchforks in voters' hands.
I mean, that's as valid a reason as any. But I'll make it even better for you.
I mean, that is the
it's
misery
an easy
index,
way to kill
right.
It's an easy way to keep the Fed in charge of the central bank in charge of everything, and therefore kill the growth baby in the crib, right?
Yes.
Before it ever learns to walk. That was the whole point. Well, guess what? Guess who benefits from that? The people who know that that's what's coming.
Mm-hmm.
It gets back to the fiat elite that you invoked earlier. So we may actually be at an even more interesting inflection point in time than we even think, because all of these things are beginning to line up. We're moving towards a Treasury dominance. We're moving away from a Fed dominance. That means that what is the Federal Reserve role in the future? Well, as a transitional thing, it gets to be the friggin' gatekeeper to charge foreign central banks with access to our markets for swap lines and everything else, which they've all complained about. The Europeans have been worried for 2 years now that the Fed won't give them a swap line if they get into trouble. Yeah, you think?
Yeah, well, the core product of a central bank in general is a bailout machine.
Right.
The rest of it is decoration. The interest rates are, to claim. it's like what they do with blood pressure. Okay, so in the old days there was a huge range of blood pressure that was considered just fine. Don't worry
Right.
about it. You go up to 160 and it was fine. And then they keep ratcheting it, right? So now it's like if you're below 120 you need a pill. If you're above 123 you need a pill.
Right.
So all the interest rate business, the Phillips curve, the idea that we have to trade off inflation, we have to fine tune this, trust us guys. If we weren't in charge, it would be an absolute disaster. That to me is the doctor selling the snake oil. But if
Mhm.
you if you just okay, accept that that's propaganda, it's BS. The Fed makes everything worse. Fine, put that over on the side. What's the core function of the Fed? So in other words, if the Fed melts away and the only thing that's like it stops influencing markets and dominating interest rates, and it reverts to sort of the disguise comes off like the end of Scooby Doo, and what's left? It's a bailout machine. Full stop. That's the point of a Fed. The rest of it
Mhm.
is propaganda to cover up what it's doing. It is a bailout machine.
Yep.
The Fed funds rate, sets the terms of the bailout.
Yep.
This is how much it'll cost you to get bailout money. The swaps. I mean, the swaps. I think during 2008, the swaps got outrageous, right? They were like in the trillions. Just an insane amount of money that went out the door. Nobody voted on that. The average voter has no idea what a swap is. There's no idea that that's democratically
Mhm.
valid. Like I've got this principle that the government, so, candidates win elections. If they then do things that voters don't understand, I don't think they have a mandate for that because they haven't cleared that with voters. They haven't been elected to do that. And
Right.
certainly I would put swamp in that category. Like the Fed needs to be a hell of a lot more open. Just in general, like I think I mean, the Fed is obviously unconstitutional, but to have any kind of moral authority, voters
Mhm.
need to actually understand what the heck this is.
Right.
And swaps are bailouts of foreign countries or by extension foreign banks. If you actually ask the American voter, do you think that we should bail out Wall Street? Okay, and then if you ask them, do you think we should bail out banks in other countries? Right? I mean, you're going to get what? Bankers will say yes, and that's it. So I think all this stuff is completely legitimate. But I think you raised an interesting point that if the Fed is becoming impotent in its alleged role of steering the economy, then fundamentally all that's left is just bailouts.
Yeah, it's just there as well, quote unquote, the lender of last resort. And so then the question is, does it work for us or does it work for somebody else? And, it's funny, go back to Argentina, right? Earlier in the year, I think it was earlier this year, or late last year, when Besant gave the $40 billion swap line to Argentina to get Milei through the elections because there was clearly someone was predating on the Argentinian peso in order to try and foment a problem, a political problem to keep Milei from getting reelected. That was what happened. That's a practical, real world application of what you just described as well. We can have Argentina fail, or we can give them a $40 billion swap line. I remember Besson having to go on to and do multiple interviews where somebody says, "Why did you bail out Argentina?" Oh, I did not bail out Argentina. I gave them a swap line, and we made money on that swap line. Like we
Yeah.
let them borrow $40 billion, and then we got paid back 45 billion, and or whatever it was, 41 billion or whatever the hell it was, and we made money on it. It's different. A bailout is we gave you money and there's no money coming back. Swap line is basically a repo, and we call it whatever we want to call it, but at the end of the day, it's a repo, it's a contract. If that's infinitely rolled over and it's never paid back, well, then it's a bailout, right? Then it's a different thing, and that's what the Fed did during 2008.
2008,
1.7 trillion
exactly.
dollars or 2.7 trillion dollars in mortgage-backed securities that they couldn't sell. All that was different, right? I'm just reminding everybody that just because something looks like it's something in the past does not necessarily mean it is the past. It's like the Trump's use of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve this year was different than what Biden did during the the early days of the Russia-Ukraine war. There, Biden sold the oil. Full stop. Sold it, gone. Trump is done, and it's in the reports. I did a whole podcast with Vince Launching on this. Those were exchanges. Those were basically 1 year repos. Yes, ExxonMobil, you can have 100 million barrels of crude, and you owe us 105 million barrels of crude next year. And as long as ExxonMobil honors their contract, it comes off the inventory report for the SPR because it has to, because the oil's not physically there, but it'll come back as a matter of course in, say, 6 months or 7 months or whatever the hell the repo contract is. So understand that these are fundamental. Sometimes things rhyme, but they don't necessarily aren't necessarily the same. And it's very easy to get caught up in the sensationalism and the I just get tired of it. Sometimes people just don't actually do the work, right? And I'm not accusing you of this. I'm talking about in general. Like, it's very frustrating. Like, guys, there's the press release. It's right there. And it said this was an exchange. So what does that mean? Well, it means this. And that's different
Yeah.
than, right? It's different than something else. Bailouts are bailouts. Swap lines are swap lines. They are not the same thing. And just because and that's because we're all like living in a world of maximal distrust doesn't mean that, they're always doing the underhanded thing. That's part of the problem I think we're all fighting at this point is our
Well,
own disillusionment, our own skepticism, all of that. And we rightly so. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be skeptical and disillusioned and angry, or I get it. I'm not, I've lived in that world, but I'm at the point now where I'm like, I'm exhausted and I just, okay. What's the worst that could happen that they're actually trying to work for us for today? This is part of the reason why I wanted to have you on the cast today. Is like maybe some of the crap that they're actually doing is working.
yeah, I mean, you can argue that. I mean, so first off, whether or not you make a profit, it's still a bailout. The 2008 bailouts made money on paper. It is a bailout.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime if somebody is distressed and they want money and they come to the government and the government gives them money, in my book, that's a bailout.
Sure.
Did they make profit on it? Yes, in the case of Argentina. But so setting that aside, I mean, my first point is just that when we talk about the Fed becoming obsolete, that's the function that it's always going to keep. Right? That is the most important function for the sponsors of the Fed, for the people who bribed senators and journalists to get the Fed passed back in 1913. That's what they were after, is the bailouts. Not necessarily because of the money involved, but the reason is that if I know that I can, say, gamble on stocks, and if I lose the money, I can hit you, Tom, up for a loan as big as I want, as many billion as I want, for as long as I want, and I can pay you back at my convenience, so I can continue speculating, and then when I make some money, I'll pay you back with a profit, and then you can tell your wife that it wasn't a bailout, right? So,
no, I agree, Peter. I'm not. Yeah, I'm still not. I agree. I think it sucks, but
yeah, but having said, so like in the case of Argentina, I like Malay,
in the geostrategic playbook here,
there are
this is
some countries
again another
that
triangulation play against the ultimate triangulation artist, meaning the
yeah,
British. It was clearly
yeah,
this was geostrategic, and therefore, at a
right,
certain level, sometimes money is geostrategic, folks. We can't get around it. We'd all like it to
yeah.
be not, but it is.
Yeah, there are some countries in this world that I'm more annoyed about bailing out than others, and so we'll just leave it there. Listen,
I agree. Like, I don't, do I want to
which
see
countries I have in mind?
let me put it this way: I would rather see Malay bailed out in Argentina than to see Bofa bailed out of their gold shorts when they've had 15 years to be told,
There
"Oh,
you
by the
go.
way, get out of your gold shorts." Like, no, Bofa, you get to go bankrupt and you get eaten by Citigroup and J.P. Morgan, and the rest of us, move on with our lives.
Oh God, that would have been so glorious. There was a moment there in 2008. I think it was BB&T, the guy who ran BB&T, which was based like they used to send out thousands of copies of Atlas Shrugged out to schools.
Right.
So BB&T, and then I think Warren Buffett at the time floated as well. But both of them were talking about, okay, all these banks screwed up. They bet the house, they lost. So let them fail, and then we'll pick them up for a song. People forget, like, if Citibank had gone bust in 2008, it's not like they would shut down all the branches and lay off everybody.
Right.
It's a bankruptcy. The way that a bankruptcy works is your shareholders get wiped out. Whatever's left, the bankruptcy judge more or less holds an auction, and then some other bank buys it. Some other bank like BB&T or like Warren Buffett, who's more prudent. It would have been so glorious if we would just let these guys fall, which is part of why, I mean, I'm kind of, rooting for the financial crisis, hopefully with new management, where we don't bail them out. And to W's credit, his first instinct was to not bail them out. He said,
Mhm.
let them hang. You live by the sword. Okay. So, these guys gambled. I think Lehman was 20x leveraged. It was crazy leveraged. I don't remember the exact
Um,
number. It might not have been that high, but it was
the
high. It was
the
like 20.
the fun part about it is, and this is fun. But I did some research into this for about a year and a half ago for the newsletter one month. I was tracing some stuff and I was going back to 2008. And I think, well, I'll tell the story and then I'll let you respond to it and then we'll call it off. But I was watching a thing. I was trying to get the order of events right because it's in the ether. It's 2008. This is 2025. 17 years ago. What do I remember? Right, in the order of failure, because I was thinking about Fannie and Freddie.
Yeah.
And it turns out that it was like Fannie and Freddie were nationalized, right? A week before Lehman Brothers entered the scene. AIG had already been bailed out the first
Oh, I
time.
didn't know that. Okay.
Oh
Interesting.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. This one's
Yeah.
fascinating. I'll remind myself. I'll send you a copy of that issue of the
Yeah.
newsletter where I go through all this because Hester Pierce, then at Georgetown University,
Yeah.
not George, yeah,
Yeah.
George Mason University. Sorry, I
Mason.
misspoke.
Yeah.
She's now working, I think, with Russ Vogt over at OMB, or one of the cabinet offices.
She was at SEC.
Was she? Okay, yeah, SEC. You're correct.
Yeah. Yeah. She was,
Um,
she was crypto mom. She was
yeah,
like the most pro Bitcoin person over at SEC.
but what's interesting about her, I watched while trying to get all this back into my head. I watched a great presentation that she did. It's on the internet of the timeline of AIG and Fannie and Freddie and all that, and it was very interesting. And she kept asking the question, why did we go through multiple rounds of bailouts of AIG, but not Lehman Brothers, which would have been less money? And why were Fannie and Freddie nationalized when they didn't need to be? When you ask
Yeah.
that question, you realize that 2008 was a crime scene, but a different crime scene than you think it was. Because
Love it.
London's
Yeah.
AIG got bailed out, and we got
America's, yeah, didn't, not
yeah.
initially until, they started working the phones and said, it's going to be the Great Depression. And I assume money changed hands.
Oh, I
And then
think
next thing you know, we're
Paulson was
bailing everybody out.
absolutely involved in all of that as well.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm at the point now where I'm like, 2008 was designed to get full control over our yield curve by
Oh, it's incredible.
by offshores.
If you look at the power grab, one of my favorite charts, you can look at banks founded per year in the United States.
Hmm.
And before the 2008 crisis, it was like half a dozen a year.
Hmm.
In other words, it was hard to start a bank, but there were new banks.
Right.
After 2008, nothing.
None.
Because they captured it, right?
Yeah.
They closed the door. And you've had all these sort of semi banks that have tried to break in. You had Caitlin Long out in Wyoming.
Yes.
You had Peter Schiff
Hmm.
down in Puerto Rico. He wanted a full reserve bank. You've had Elon with X Money. You got
Hmm.
PayPal. You got all these, and it is much harder for them. I don't think any of them have really broken into traditional banking
No.
because Wall Street got punished for 2008 by handing them the rule book and saying rewrite anything you want. You can
Hmm.
outlaw your competition, right? All these new techs are coming. They're going to disintermediate banking, and people are going to be able to get high yield accounts. Just anything you want, guys. What do you want? The world is your oyster. Why? Because we gave you, however, was it 800 billion of bailouts, and here's a tip. I mean, it's just astounding,
Hmm.
the corruption of it. But as you mentioned earlier, that's now interesting because that battle is currently still ongoing with stable coins,
Yes, it is.
right? Where, yeah,
And Fannie
stable
and
coin
Freddie. And Fannie and
would
Freddie.
dis. How are Fannie and Freddie involved with stable coins?
Yeah, well, they're
Or are those
involved
two
in that.
separate?
Remember that Fannie and Freddie's primary role in the marketplace was to manage the 10-year versus 30-year fixed rate more the 10-year treasury versus 30-year fixed rate mortgage rates and use that to help fine tune credit flow. And that has been kept unbelievably wide this entire time, and it's still going on. I've been doing a lot of cross this because I hate the British so freaking much. I have figured out that they are running the yield curve control program on us, and they don't want Fannie and Freddie out of conservatorship, and that's first SOFR, then Fannie and Freddie, then Get rid of Dodd. There's many things about Dodd-Frank that need to go away. The Banking Act of 1935. There's all this stuff that needs to go away that has given them control over the long end of our yield curve. And the end carry trade is also part of this big whole racket that they're all running. But when you really look at what's been going on, especially since um oh God, it's been for about the last year and a half since really as SOFR has taken complete control over the markets and synthetic LIBOR went away and all of that stuff. As the Bank of Japan has brought interest rates up to 1%, you're watching volatility in a lot of these bond spreads just go away. It's just all being held in amber. And it's crazy. And I do this for my patrons on a regular. They all have heard this rant 1,000 times because I do it every Wednesday and every Sunday for them, right? So, but yeah, no, I've been watching this like a hawk. It's all in the bond spreads. It's all in the currency markets. I'm not a bond guy. I'm not a currency guy. I have to learn this stuff like it's like pulling teeth. It's like birthing babies. Every time I come up with a new slide, and I'm like, what does this mean? And I got to think about it for a month. It's horrible because but bond traders look at me and go, oh, how long did that take you to figure out? They pull it up on their Bloomberg terminal. And go, yeah, they're obviously doing that. You know what I mean? And because they trade these markets for a living. That's what they do. It's their gig. It's like
Yeah.
I talk gold plumbing with Vince Lanci, and he just like, no, dude, it's because of this and this. I'm like, oh, right, obviously. So my point being is that so much of the story that we think we understand about the way these markets interact with each other, yeah, a lot of it is just honestly those fiat elite that you invoked at the beginning of this podcast. It's just them. And now
Yeah.
what we're trying to do by degrees is walk them out of the market so that we can get back to something close to all the things that you and I would prefer, and all the libertarians and all the sound money guys would prefer. But the path from here to there is really convoluted. And obviously they can deploy trillions of dollars in capital against us at a moment's will. Right. So
That's the trick. I think the two most difficult industries and arguably the two most important on earth are finance and healthcare.
mhm.
Both of them have been so lobbied that they're almost completely unrecognizable. Finance, honestly, is more important because finance channels the capital,
Yes.
right? Finance can decide whether you're going to be building good things in future or, whether that money is being deployed to destroy the world. And I mean, those two industries, I think in all cases, right, when you hear healthcare reform or when you hear financial reform, when you hear Sarbox, what was the other one? Dodd-Frank.
Frank.
All of them are enemy action. Okay, none of
Yes.
those are modernization is the term they use because then they can avoid saying anything else, right? They just because everything modern is better.
Right.
If I take
Of
my
course.
pool house and modernize it, it's obviously going to have better insulation, better electricity. Okay, so they use this term modernization to hide what they're doing. They are always corrupt. Every time those people touch either of those industry, it gets worse. And unfortunately, they're catastrophic. Like they're not destroying delivery pizza, right? They're destroying like the load-bearing walls. One of the big reasons for the rise of the DSA, taking it back to the very start there,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
is the effed up healthcare system.
Yes.
People, anybody who's not American, it's hard to imagine being terrified of going bankrupt and losing your house because you got sick, right? That's difficult to understand. Finance, in both cases, they hide the damage. And so, normies look at it and just say, oh, it's screwed up. Like they have no idea why these things are happening to them. But I agree with you 100%. That you should always assume anything that any politically connected organizations or companies do in those spaces, you should assume is enemy action.
It is. And the more I watch it, the more I realize it's foreign enemy action along with domestic complicity. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
it's horrible. And we just need to know who our enemy is. And if we know who our enemy is, then we can predict what they're going to do next. Peter, this has been a fucking blast, dude. I've really enjoyed every minute of this. I really have. I'm glad you stopped by today. I really am. And I think I kept you longer than we were originally intending. So
Yeah, no, but yeah, it's good. All
Yeah, well,
good.
this is good. Peter and I were joking before the podcast started. Like, usually we go about 45 minutes and then we usually run out of things to say, and not today. So it was fun. I enjoyed that. So, Peter St. Onge, tell everybody where they can find you, do the thing and do the self promotion thing, and we'll get you out the door.
I'm over on X, Prof. St. Ange. You're probably going to have the thing in the show notes.
Yeah,
So do a weekly summary of what's going on in the news and a monthly newsletter with stock recommendations
nice.
for playing the next big thing, the next bubble.
Good. All right, excellent. And you can find that on
profstange.com.
excellent. Okay. And as always, I'm TFL1728 on Twitter, doing battle on a daily basis, trying to like bring stuff back to something close to normality. Patreon/Gold Goats and Guns, which is how we make our VIG, selling our newsletter every month, along with my twice weekly market reports and rants. So, with all that said, we're out. You guys be well. You take care. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.